Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Elliott from Dirk.com, and today I've got a quick video showing how I would import a CAD model, split it up into pieces, and then create an exploded view animation. This is a really popular look that a lot of people ask for when it comes to product animation in particular. Whether or not there's actually a good reason for doing this, I'm not so sure about, but hey, it does look pretty cool. It's basically the same thing that we did with the camera animation portion of my cell phone tutorial, but with a little more attention given to part separation, keeping track of origin points, some shape key deformation to make this little clip pop, yeah, things like that. Now, of course, if you want to follow along, you'll have to have a model to work with, really just anything with multiple parts. It doesn't have to be a CAD model. CAD models are just usually kind of disgusting with too many parts and great for this type of animation. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to provide the file for this particular one like I normally would on my Patreon, since it does have some proprietary details, but the methods we'll cover should get you pretty well up to speed on the basic process. Now, just really quick, the model I'm using is of a mechanical leveling device for a smartphone or action camera called Gravgrip. It was designed by a guy named Kevin Thomas, who reached out to me a long time ago about making a Kickstarter ad for its launch and yada, yada, yada. Raised over $1 million, and it is a product that you can buy. Super cool thing and great for this type of animation. So definitely check that out if you're into it. But let's jump into the video. Alright, so I'm in a pretty default Blender 3.0 beta scene here. We've got the default cube and everything. I'm going to get rid of those and go ahead and import my CAD model. This is one that I believe was exported from either Fusion 360 or maybe SolidWorks. I'll have to follow up on the details there, but let's go ahead and import. It's going to be an OBJ. OBJ I've found tends to be the easiest format to work with between CAD files and Blender. People just always seem to be able to export it, and yeah, it's just a pretty common file format. If you're working with something like a step file, then that might be something that you need to get an add-on for. I do actually have an add-on called Stepper, which will allow me to import step files and works really well, but for the most part, I've never had too much issue with people exporting OBJ files for me. Now, for some reason, they usually come in, bigger than they should be, or just bigger than the, it's scaled obviously proportionally, but I find that I almost always need to scale things down by like 0.1, and then sometimes even 0.1 again to get it to a more reasonable size. But I think I'll leave it at the previous scale. So that's just to get things working a little bit better with my existing grid. I basically want to be able to move things and have them snap along the grid. But of course, with most CAD projects, everything's going to be pretty well to scale. So if you need to check the scale, that's something you can do. But for our purposes, we're going to be talking more about the animation here. And of course, you can always scale things after the fact. Now, just for the sake of making myself feel a little better, the scale on this object right now is 0.1 because we scaled that down. So I'm going to press Control A and apply the scale. So now, this is, like I said, a CAD file, and it came with, some of these different parts were probably hidden before, and so, they shouldn't have necessarily exported, but this is completely common when I'm receiving CAD files to kind of just have extra stuff in there, and this is all just one piece, so you might be thinking, how are we going to make an exploded view? We need to go in and separate all these pieces, and yeah, that's basically exactly what we're going to do. So what I want to do first is, sometimes you can pick different parts by OBJ files could sometimes have different materials already assigned. See there, you can see we could select those objects that way. Something here was powder coat black. Select, looks like that's a small piece on the GoPro. And I should say that this, I'll probably cover it in the intro, but this is the Gravgrip hydraulic stabilizer. It's no batteries or anything. It's kind of just a camera leveler. It's a pretty cool project I work on with a guy named Kevin for a Kickstarter, and yeah, it did really well, and he's selling it. So if you want to buy this, you can. But yeah, it's a good example for this exploded view. So what I'm gonna do is press Tab to go into edit mode, and then I'm gonna select everything. I don't think I really need to do that, but I'm gonna press P and separate by loose parts, and tabbing back out of edit mode. Now you'll see that it has kind of successfully separated this. You can see we've got some issues here where, the cameras, for example, weren't separate. But that's okay. And to see those separate parts a little easier, I'm going to go up here into this top drop down, and then Blender has this mode called random, which will just randomly assign kind of these pastel colors to different parts of the model, which is really helpful for differentiating them all and just kind of seeing what those separate parts are. So with that done, I'll also turn on this cavity option just because it kind of highlights our edges a little bit better, and that looks nice, I think. But yeah, what I want to do now is just go through and start deleting all these things. So circle selecting is the way I usually like to do that, but you'll see that, I can kind of drag across and it won't always get everything. And that's because right now everything has the same origin, which is right here at that point. So, if I scroll over that, it's going to get everything. But what I'll do to make the selection process a little easier, just right click and then set origin to geometry. And what that's going to do is assign origins. You can see all these little dots here are now assigned to kind of the average location of all the vertices that make up those different parts. So now I can just go in here. I'm just going to delete the phone, delete the GoPro, delete that. Now sometimes when you're doing this, you may have, so there's these little parts. Sometimes you can avoid having these get separated in different pieces if you remove doubles when you start the file. But that's not always a good thing. Sometimes with these CAD models, there can be, geometry in here. Like there's these bearings that are perfectly aligned with the housing that they're in. And if you remove doubles to remove overlapping geometry, then it might accidentally connect pieces that you wanted to be separate. So just be careful when you're doing remove doubles. Sometimes it's best to just try separating by loose parts first. And then if you need to, you can remove doubles on individual pieces after the fact. But this, for example, is a little logo. I know that this is supposed to be part of the mold here. So I'm going to press, I'm just going to press Control J to join those together. But this is kind of the first step to creating an exploded view like this would be to just sort of, get your model cleaned up to the point you want and remove any additional pieces. And then the next thing we're going to do is just kind of organize, just make sure we kind of understand the model. So what I'll do is just press, I'm actually going to turn on my little gizmo here. I can hold Control, and that's going to be really helpful for putting this back together. If I know I'm moving things at defined increments, it's going to be easier to line them back up than if I just did that, because then to get it back would be, I wasn't sure exactly where it was. So holding Control to work with the grid. And if you do need to adjust the grid, you can change it up here. And then also for those of you who are concerned about the scale of objects, the units are in this tab right here, the Scene tab, Scene Properties tab. But I'm just going to kind of pull all these different things apart and just sort of get a little bit of a feel for the model. So this is kind of a pin that holds everything together. I believe that is overmolded into that part. So those are actually, they're separate pieces. It looks like, at least in the CAD file they are, but I might just go ahead and join them, or at least, I'll just join them. And if I needed to assign different materials, which I'll select this one, select that one, Control J to join them. If I needed to assign different materials to those, then what I can do is just pressing L will select islands. And when we did that initial command, which was to separate everything into individual parts, that's basically what it's doing. It's just going in and selecting mesh islands that are not connected to other parts of the mesh and joining them together. So we've also got a bearing here. So I'm going to pull this back, and I'm just kind of pulling the model apart, getting it to a point where I can sort of understand all the different parts and pieces here. You can see we've got this ball that goes in here. This is a weight set that's used to adjust the balance of the camera on the mount here. And this is actually an old version of the Gravgrip. The new versions don't even have that. But I'm going to select all these pieces, maybe these, and then I'm going to parent that to that. So let's parent those objects. Now this part, it kind of rotates in there. I don't think that's really going to be crucial to the exploded view, but in case we do want to rotate, we want it to rotate about this kind of ball joint there. So I'm going to assign a new origin. And the way I'm going to do that is just finding some good geometry where I know would be the center of that. Shift S, snap my cursor to selected, tapping Add Edit Mode, and then right click, set origin to 3D cursor. Now when I rotate that, it's going to rotate as it should, kind of along that. Now there might be a couple other places where we want to do a similar type of thing. For example, this, if I wanted to rotate it, I would want it to rotate on this axis, but right now the origin's been placed over here. And when we do that snap origin to geometry, that's just going to take, the average of all these points and kind of put it right in the middle to what it assumes is kind of the average. But with all this threading down here, it's kind of a more dense area, so it's kind of pulled our origin there. But anyways, to get it back to about where I want it to kind of be in the middle of this circle. So I'm just going to select some, a logical place, and hopefully your CAD file is as clean as this. Sometimes they're not so clean. This one's not too bad, but this is an exported CAD model, so some stuff is a little bit funky, but it's overall it's really easy to work with, not too bad. But that's going to be what I assume is the top and bottom of that circle exactly. So Shift S, cursor to selected, and then set the origin to the 3D cursor. Now, if I was going to rotate this, it's going to rotate on that axis. So that's making me think too that we probably want to parent this object to this. So let's parent that, keep transform. So now that's together. And then this one, let's parent to this as well. Control P object. So now this is all together. Now this, I think, actually is part of that. Maybe another overmold situation, but let's just do it as a parent. And then, so now is this all together? Okay, so the last thing would be to connect this ball. Control P object, keep transform. So again, I'm just trying to kind of understand my model and the different parts here. You don't need to parent everything, especially if you're just going to be doing like a linear axis animation. But in case I want to do some rotation here, I want these to be moving sort of logically with it. So let's maybe let's pull that back. So I think that bearing is on the back side, and then we've got all these parts in here, and this is kind of the meat of the device. So putting this all together here, that caps out there, and then we've got this part with a little gear on the end of it. And then when I do the animation, I'll probably have to figure out a way to maybe move that out of the way so that we can have, there's no clipping when that passes through there. But yeah, just trying to understand the model. This is kind of the first step. If you are the one who actually made the model, you might not need to do this. But for me, anytime I'm handed CAD data and I'm going to be animating it, the first thing I do is just, massive inspection of the model, just trying to understand the different parts and pieces, make sure I understand how it works, so that when I'm doing an exploded view like this, it all makes sense. But with this all out there, I think that looks like we've got everything how we want, got every part separated. If you needed to go in and separate things more, you could, but this all looks pretty good. So what I want to do now is, I could probably just leave it all apart like that because that kind of looks nice. So maybe we'll actually do that. So let's say on maybe frame 30, we're going to have it look like this. Well, I guess these would be, maybe these would be a little bit lower. And then, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm just going to put it all, back together. So let's just, let's pull that in there, pull that in there. This builds character, putting it back together. It's kind of fun too because it's really easy when you hold control to snap everything together. It's kind of just like a super easy Lego kit. So this is usually the way I actually like to do it, is with it all assembled, and then I'll insert my first round of keyframes. So that's what I want to do now. I'm going to go to frame 1, press A to select everything, and then down here I can go into my keying set, and for the active keying set I'm going to do location. Select that, and now with all those selected, I can just press I, and now we'll insert keyframes on the selected keying set, which right here is location. So if I click on any of these, you can see they have location keyframes selected. So if I moved all this out of the way, because there's a keyframe here, it's gonna snap it back because it's all tied to that keyframe. And that's one thing that's really great about keyframes too, besides just using them for animation, obviously, is you can kind of use them as like save states to make sure things stay in place. I do that sometimes when I'm just doing still renders, is I'll actually add animation to the objects just to kind of hold them in different positions. But what I'm going to do now is just advance to a known frame. You could just go to frame 1, honestly, but I'll go out, 1 second or so, which is 30 frames if I was in the 30 frames per second setting, which this is again Blender 3.0 beta. I'm going to run into something that's confusing, but so far it looks pretty much like Blender 2.9, so we're in good shape. But now with all those together, I'm going to start doing the exploded animation. So I think for that, what I want to do is use this little record button, auto keying, which is going to automatically insert keyframes when I move things. Now let's see if that works. So let's drag that down. Okay, so it did, but it inserted keyframes for everything, and I really just want to do it for location. So yeah, I can do only active keying set. So now when we move this down, it's only going to do on the location. And that's just to avoid, I'm not going to be messing with the scale. The rotation I might do eventually, but I don't want to worry about it now. So just inserting location keyframes. And then maybe we pull this one down too. Maybe these don't go as high. So now as I insert keyframes, it's going to, when I move things, it's going to automatically insert keyframes, which is really handy for doing this type of an animation. So maybe this whole thing, slides down out of there. Maybe this slides down a little bit. So this basically screws in and it'll tighten on this part. This is what the GoPro and the phone and stuff connect to. So then maybe this comes all the way out. This comes out. And now when you're doing this, you don't necessarily have to hold control to snap. In fact, I won't, because I'm really going to just kind of eyeball it. I want it to visually look nice. It doesn't necessarily need to be, exactly on a certain value. That's just handy when you're pulling everything apart so that you can get it back together properly. But this is kind of a nice, you want to think a little bit about what your camera angle is going to be. But really today, I just want to focus on the actual animation, not so much the setup of everything else. So maybe this kind of comes out a little bit. This comes out. Maybe this goes back a little bit. Bring that there. Something like that I think is working pretty decent for me. So those should have all had keyframes automatically inserted. So let's just make the whole thing just 30 frames. Press spacebar. And then bam, we got our exploded animation pretty much just like that. So working easily. If you wanted to have it come back together, let's just give ourselves some more frames. This is kind of an odd thing happening down there. It's like kind of flashing. So I'm pressing C to circle select, and that's just selecting. Oh, it's only. Okay, I want to make sure I have all my objects selected, and then C to select all of those. Shift D, and then let's say maybe it only takes 20 frames to get back together. So our whole animation is, well, we'll leave it at 60 so it kind of pauses for a second. So that's pretty much it for that. That's kind of how I would do an exploded view animation. And this is obviously a little bit easier because it's just all linear animation. But if you want to add some, detail to this, of course, these would technically screw in when they go up. There's no actual knurling on here, so you wouldn't really be able to see that. But you can add other little details, like maybe maybe this starts and ends with this rotation. And by the way, if you press I like we did earlier out here, but up in this field, it's going to insert it, but it'll just do it for the selected object, even if you have multiple selected. So let's have that start and finish at that I. And then maybe in the middle, this whole thing kind of like rotates a little bit, just to give it a little bit of interest. Now, if we undo, so let's just say, yeah, we're doing rotation now. So let's go to keying and do rotation. So that didn't insert keyframes when I moved it because the active keying set was set to location, but just move that a tad and it'll automatically insert rotation keyframes. So now that kind of just adding a little bit of interest there. Now, where else could we add some animation? We could actually add, let's just, let's say at the beginning here, let's just go ahead and insert location keyframes for everything, or sorry, rotation keyframes. So with my keying set to rotation, I just press I and it should automatically insert all the keyframes for everything. Good. And let's do it again down here. Oh, I only added 3. I need to select everything, press I. Okay, so now everything has a rotation keyframe. So maybe in the middle here, we can just let this all kind of go a little crazy. This will probably drive engineers wild, but let's just let's type F3 and search randomize transform, which will now open up this menu, which will allow me to randomize the rotation of everything just a little bit. Maybe do that. Just kind of cool, and just of these selected pieces. I don't want there to be any clipping or anything. But now let's do now with those selected, let's press I right there, and that should add all those keyframes. And since we had them on the front and the back, they should come right back together. Yeah, so just kind of a cool thing. Now, one last little detail that you might want to do with with this particular part, there's this little clip that goes in and out. So let's see if we can add maybe a shape key to simulate that clip. depressing. So to add a shape key, what we're going to do is just hit this little plus sign right there. And now we'll add basically, it'll remember the shape, that shape as the basis. So then we do one more shape key, and then we can just bring this little part down. So let's, pressing Alt-Z, by the way, to go into my X-ray view. And then, so I just selected one of these, and then I want to, well, for one, let's, we want to rotate this about sort of that curve right there. So I just selected two vertices, Shift S, cursor to selected, because that's about the axis where I want to rotate this whole part. And then I'm just going to select like the top right here, and then Control plus will grow my selection. I'm just going to keep pressing that until it grows to, maybe right about there is good. And then there's a couple spots it didn't quite get, so let's circle select to add those. And yeah, looks like I got a good amount there. And then what I'm going to do is just press, let's actually turn on some proportional editing up here and select connected only. So now I can press R to rotate this, and then let's rotate it about the 3D cursor. So pressing period on my number pad, or sorry, period on my keyboard. And then now I can kind of rotate that. So you can see there's this little clip that kind of fits into that slot there. And this is one thing that helps, whenever you're working with somebody on this, you obviously need to talk about the model. So now I'll pull that down, and that's, on my key 1 here. So now if I tab out of edit mode, we've got this little control that will adjust that. So maybe this whole animation, let's actually pull out a graph editor. So up here, I want to go into my graph editor, and those are all the keyframes. For one, I'll normalize them. Okay, so that's everything. A little bit confusing, but those are all our keyframes, so 1 to 50. So maybe we have, for one thing, if you want to make this all, a little bit longer, for example, maybe you want this to happen over 120 frames, you can just press A to select everything up here, and then G, and you wouldn't want to move it like that. That's pretty cool, but just G and X to slide along the time frame. And now it's just going to create some space on either side, and then I can press S and X to scale those out. And that's just going to make our animation happen a little bit slower, which is nice. And now will give us an opportunity too to add in some frames for the shape key here. So that animation doesn't start right now until frame 25. So maybe at frame 25, we have this fully depressed insert keyframe, and then we'll pull it back a little bit, and we'll have that back to 0. And with my auto keying on, it is automatically adding a keyframe for me, which that worked a little bit weird. Be careful using that auto keying. Sometimes you can accidentally insert keyframes when you don't want to. So then let's have that, so it clips down, then maybe when it goes out, pops back up, keyframe automatically inserted, pops out, and then maybe right there, we'll have it still up, but then go forward a few frames, we'll have it go down, insert keyframe, and then we'll have it kind of snap back up. Boom. So now we've got this cool open up, click. Just kind of a simple thing. Hopefully I showed you a few different tools you could use there. Since we animated or since we changed the origin here, maybe we want to add a little bit of animation to that. Just so maybe right here it's got a little, what would that be? The X, which means we would need to parent this. Control P, object, keep transform. And we didn't parent everything inside, so that might actually be a bad idea. But you could parent everything, and then of course if you wanted to move your whole object, I would recommend adding an empty. So Shift A, add an empty. You can add whatever you want, and then you just want to parent all the other parents to that empty, and then you could move the empty around. But I'll leave that for you to figure out. Definitely, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. But really the magic happens up here in the graph editor. If you really want to smooth things out, change some things, you could add in some dynamic effects here. This is probably going to look absolutely bonkers. Okay, so you probably don't want to do that, but let's see if we did. I'm pressing T, by the way, to bring these up. That's kind of cool, the bounce effect. But yeah, I'll do another tutorial sometime going more in depth into the graph editor, but yeah, for the most part, maybe just leave it on Bezier. Looks pretty good. But yeah, there's your basic CAD file to exploded view animation. Won't talk much about the actual rendering of this because it's going to be highly dependent on your own model. But yeah, that's kind of how I would go about taking a CAD model, splitting it up, adjusting origins as needed, and then adding animation to the different parts to kind of show it off. This is something that people ask for a lot in the freelance projects I do, but yeah, hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Definitely check out Gravgrip, very cool product. There is a new version available. This is the old one. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.